All right, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining me for this unusual yet important lunchtime topic. If you're unfamiliar with UF IFAS Extension Sarasota County, we are the result of a partnership between Sarasota County, the University of Florida, and U.S. Department of Agriculture. So there is an extension office in every county in Florida, as well as nationwide. There are other extension offices that are a partnership between other local governments and land-grant universities. We take research and resources from UF and share them with our community through a variety of different topics and areas, all in hopes of serving our community and providing vital information. So let's get right into what to do about rodents. So when we're looking at which rodents are most likely to infest homes and cause human pest concerns, we want to look at non-native commensal rodents. So commensal is a word used to describe rodents that generally live in close proximity to humans and depend upon or significantly utilize human structures and food sources to meet their survival needs. The three non-native species of concern in Florida are going to be the house mouse, the roof rat, and the Norway rat. And they differ from native species in that native species are specifically adapted and suited to surviving in their outdoor environments, whereas these commensal rodents may not be or may prefer to utilize human structures for survival. So understanding a little bit of the background information about each of these species can help you in preventing infestations, identifying which may be present in the case of an active or suspected issue, and potentially in your management choices as well. So the house mouse, it's going to be our smallest of the three commensal rodents. It's generally short body in comparison to a long tail with proportionally large ears. And you'll see for each of these species that the color can vary. So generally you'll have a light colored belly in a house mouse with a white to gray fur coat or shades of brown or black. House mice are going to prefer insects, nuts, seeds, plant and vegetable matter, grains, human foods, and pet foods, which again will be common throughout these three species. The roof rat, which is a common pest concern here in the state of Florida, also called the black rat, the ship rat, or the house rat, has a tail length that's generally greater than its head and body length combined. They'll have sleeker, darker colored hair, but not always black, and also a longer face with large ears. Roof rats prefer meats, nuts, seeds, plant and vegetable matter, garbage, as well as fruit. They love to eat fruit, which is why they can cause agricultural damage concerns and will also be found often utilizing fruit trees in neighborhoods and homes and communities. They're elusive and secretive, and again, are able to access those fruit trees because they're excellent climbers. The Norway rat, which is also called the common rat, the sewer rat, or the street rat, is going to be the heaviest bodied rodent out of these three. Their tail length is going to be generally equal to their head and body length. Again, their body will be heavier, gray to brown, and that color can vary, but generally you'll see kind of this tawny, tannish colored rodent. They also prefer garbage, as well as meat, fish, and grains are going to be found closer to water and coastal areas. They're good swimmers, but they're less agile climbers, so they're going to prefer to stay closer to the ground. And what that means for us is that areas like cellars and basements and sewers are going to be more vulnerable to infestations by Norway rats. So what makes commensal rodents such capable and impactful pests? Well, they are excellent at what they do. They're highly adaptable, they're intelligent, they're capable of learning from their environment and their experiences. And as I mentioned before, while these rodent species do have some food preferences, they're what we like to call omnivorous opportunistic feeders. So omnivorous animals can eat both plant matter and meat. And then opportunistic feeders are going to differ from an animal such as a hummingbird, which will prefer specific colored flowers for its food source. For these animals, they will eat what's available and what's easy for them to access, including garbage, and which is why they are able to survive and thrive in human areas. They have high reproductive rates. Their gnawing capabilities and their size also allow them to access areas that we want to keep them out of. And they're reservoirs for several zoonotic diseases, as well as hosts for biting insects and potential triggers for allergies and asthma in people. So they can cause some pretty serious concerns for human communities. So knowing a little bit more about each of these commensal rodents, as well as some of the behaviors and adaptations that make them such capable pests, what can we do as humans to protect our homes and neighborhoods? Well, we want to keep in mind throughout this presentation and whenever we're thinking about these rodents, the word commensal. So they're going to be looking to meet their basic needs for food, water, and shelter, and they're going to depend on human structures and communities to do so. So addressing a rodent infestation, once it's already happened, is a lengthy and challenging process. And as such, preventative adjustments to the environment in and around your home and neighborhood are critical to reducing the potential food, water, and shelter that could be available to them, and reducing the possibility of potential infestations. So what are some of those common sources of food, water, and shelter? While typical stereotypes of rodent attracting structures depict abandoned, rundown, or dirty homes and buildings, it's important to keep in mind that this is not always the case. And actually, we unintentionally feed and shelter rodents quite commonly through our daily behaviors that are normal for most of us. Consider garbage, for example. How many of you put your garbage out overnight or early in the morning before the sun rises, just so that you don't miss that garbage truck when it comes? I know I do this sometimes. And it's important to think about, okay, when do these commensal rodents come out? They're going to be more active at night and at dusk and dawn. So when we put out garbage overnight, we are making a source of food even more accessible to them at a time where they're more active and they feel safer because they have the cover of darkness that will protect them from predators that may have hunted them during the day. Additionally, when you think about and add into the mix another animal such as raccoons, who will often get into garbage and leave a mess behind, those rodents are going to come in and clean up that mess after them. So it's really important to secure garbage, to keep it contained in rodent-proof materials, rodent-proof containers with tight-fitting lids, and to also secure your garbage so that it can't be toppled over if that's a particular concern in your area. Other sources of food and unintentional feeding can be poor sanitation and cleaning practices in and around the home, ripened and rotting vegetables and fruits from trees and gardens in the yard. This is an important one, especially for roof rats, as those ripened, rotten fruits that are left around are going to attract them into the area. Pet food left outside is another really big concern. Who doesn't feel sorry for the neighborhood stray cats or dogs and want to leave them a little bit of food? But doing this can actually attract rodents into your area, as well as bird seed. Bird seed that's fallen to the ground should be cleaned up as regularly as possible, especially in areas where a rodent infestation is of high concern. And it's always a good idea to think about or weigh your options. So if you're really wanting to attract wildlife, but you know that you're in an area that is particularly vulnerable to a pest concern, or maybe your neighbor or someone else in your community has already been struggling with rodents being present in the area, then maybe that bird feeder might need to come in. For water sources, rodents don't need very much water. They can actually survive off of just a few ounces of water. So you don't need an entire pool to give them a water source. You really just need standing water, even in something as small as a little bottle cap. Leaks, leaky faucets, irrigation that's ineffective, overwatering that doesn't allow that water to seep down into the soil can all provide sources of water for rodents. And then shelter. If you see in these pictures here, we've got debris piles, wood piles, we have an abandoned vehicle. Anything that is stationary and providing cover for a long period of time is going to be vulnerable to rodent infestations. And that's often why you'll see snakes also present in those areas, because it provides shelter, but also rodents are going to be attracted to those spaces. Storm damage is of particular concern here in Florida, as when hurricanes come around, you get kind of a perfect storm, if you will, of rodents who have just been displaced potentially and are looking for a new home, with our own homes and structures that may have new damage to them. So we want to be particularly diligent after storms in repairing damage to keep those rodents out. And then we'll get into holes in and around your home in just a bit. So exclusion and rodent proofing. These techniques ensure that holes and other points of access are sealed and do not provide rodents with an easy access to the inside of your home. It is much, much easier to keep rodents out of a structure than to try to get them out once they've already inhabited and begun breeding in an area. Rats and mice can fit into incredibly small spaces. Some rats the size of a quarter, depending upon the size of the individual, and some mice the size of a dime, again, depending on that individual size. I found this completely unbelievable. So when I first found this out, I looked up a video of someone who was doing an experiment to see what size holes a mouse that was infesting their house could fit in. So they lined different holes with peanut butter and watched as that particular mouse tried to fit through each hole. And it's really true. Some of these individuals can fit into incredibly small spaces. And if they can't fit, they can simply use their gnawing capabilities to widen that space. Pictured here is an example of a residence soffit or roof where structural damage enabled rats, roof rats in particular, to come in and inhabit the inside of their home in their attic. So how do you exclude and rodent-proof your home or structure? You want to thoroughly check the outside and inside of your home for holes, gaps, and structural damage or rot. Points of concern include places where piping and wiring enters and exits the building, beneath doors, around windows, at vents, gas lines as well. And then you want to seal those holes with rodent-proof materials that cannot be gnawed through, such as sheet metal, hardware cloth, or steel wool, along with caulk or concrete. Vents can also be covered with rodent-proof metal mesh, and chimney caps can be utilized when necessary. If you're looking for more specific information and guidance on how to exclude and rodent-proof in your home, we have some resources that we'll be sharing with you throughout this presentation that will be in the chat. And please do feel free to request if you'd like them emailed to you as well. So it's really great if you can apply these practices before an issue occurs, but what do you do if you suspect that you may already be dealing with an infestation? Well, prevention and exclusion techniques should still be utilized as part of a comprehensive management plan, but you'll want to add a few extra steps. And starting out with trying to identify if there's a rodent problem. If you're just concerned, or if you're thinking, I'm not quite sure, you can use some of these telltale signs and clues, such as droppings, sounds, if you're hearing chittering and scratching behind walls, odor, live or dead rodents in and around the home are a definite sign, gnaw marks and damage. Holes in your yard can be kind of tricky because there's other wildlife species that make burrows as well. Tracks, runways, which are areas where rodents are consistently moving through, kind of like their preferred or favorite paths to access different needs. Rub marks, which are greasy, dirty sorts of marks on adjacent walls, as well as household pet behavior. If you see your pet staring intently behind walls or in cracks and crevices, it might be because something has piqued their interest there. You can also look at droppings as well, although this may be kind of challenging because droppings can vary in size. Whether they're wet or dry can also impact how they look. Several types of rodent traps exist. Spring-loaded snap traps, glue traps, and varieties of live traps are commonly seen. The traditional spring-loaded snap trap and its modern iterations are the recommended method for trapping rodents in a home. They're affordable, they're effective, they're safe when kept away from children and pets, and they're more likely to result in the humane death of a rodent when applied properly. But one important step here is to introduce those unset traps before baiting and setting them so that intelligent rodents can become used to them in the environment without thinking that they're going to cause them harm, because they will avoid them if they are able to learn that, okay, I need to stay away from this trap. You want to also use bait that's specific to the type of rodent present and provide enough food and variety to compete with other food sources. Another good tip is to place those traps in identified rodent runways and other areas where you know that rodents are active and present, and consider how you'll keep children and pets away from those traps. Live trapping is absolutely not recommended. There are specific rules and regulations for which wildlife species can be released out into the environment, and non-native and invasive species should not be released. As well, when those animals are released, they can spread diseases. So that's another reason why we don't want them to be out interacting with other wildlife species. They may simply return to the area. And then you're also putting yourself at risk for the spread of zoonotic diseases. As you're handling those rodents, you have to do something with them. You're putting yourself at risk of being bitten or scratched, or just simply touching them can cause you to interact with some of those diseases. Mothballs are commonly touted as rodent repellent, but they're not proven to be effective, and they also have serious health risks that are toxic to the human body when inhaled, and as well as the environment, as well as ultrasonic devices. Again, they may not be effective, and rodents can actually become habituated to the sound. So a healthy ecosystem offers us natural pest control. We can work with nature to reduce populations of commensal rodents by supporting efforts to preserve and protect natural areas and wildlife habitat. So some of our wildlife species that are native to Florida that predate upon rodents are barn owls and other owl species, hawk species, bobcats, foxes, eastern rat snakes, and other snake species. It's said that maybe a family of 5 barn owls alone can estimated to eat 1,000 rodents per season, which is pretty amazing. And one of the ways that we can encourage these predators, and also a diverse array of predators, because we need more than just one type of predator to keep this balance. We need multiple different species at different levels. You can create nest boxes and perches for raptors. You can landscape with native plants with various canopy layers. You can leave non-venomous snakes to carry out their ecosystem services as well. They're there for a reason. Often when you see snakes around in urban areas, parks, and your neighborhoods, they're there because they're finding their food there, and we want them to do that. This is an example that I took in a local park where we can see one of our native hawk species fulfilling an ecosystem service, helping control those rodent populations. So in severe or large-scale cases, rodenticides may be necessary. And there are 2 main types of rodenticides. There's anticoagulants and there's non-anticoagulants. We'll focus on anticoagulants as they are of most concern for people generally. They work by preventing a rodent's body from clotting blood, so that rodent will eventually bleed out over the span of several days. So first generation anticoagulants versus second generation anticoagulants, there's an important thing to note here. So first generation anticoagulants, they require multiple doses or multiple feedings by the rodent before they're lethal. Second generation anticoagulants are more powerful and more concentrated. They require only 1 dose to be lethal. However, regardless of whichever one is being utilized, the rodent does not die immediately. So they will continue to feed upon these baits, these poison baits, and they'll die after around 2 to 7 days. What that means is that when they have higher concentrations of this more powerful and concentrated, potent rodenticide, that puts other wildlife species that are going to eat that rodent at risk of being poisoned. So important wildlife that like hawks and owls. In 2022, there was a family of great horned owls in the Tampa Bay area that were all found deceased, and it was found out that it was because of rodenticides. So while these animals are trying to help control these populations, if they're eating rodents that have been poisoned, they're at risk for secondary poisoning and death. This is also an important concern for pets, as well as for people. Around 10,000 Americans actually ingest rodenticides each year, and a lot of times this can be in children. So they are a very powerful substance that should be used when necessary, but we want to be smart and we want to follow the rules and regulations when we're utilizing them. As well, generally, first generation rodenticides are going to be what's available to the general consumer, along with up to 1 pound of bait. For licensed and certified commercial pest control companies, they may be able to use second generation rodenticides, and businesses, hotels, management companies, there are specific rules and regulations for who can apply rodenticides, which ones can be applied, and the licensing and certification needed to apply them. And we'll be including, again, another resource here from the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, or FDACS, that shares more about the necessary rules and regulations to follow and the licensing and certifications that are needed. So in the case where you can't use lethal trapping, you want to use these guidelines. So never use rodenticides that are not registered with the EPA. You want to use legal rodenticides that have to be placed in tamper-resistant bait boxes or bait stations. So rodenticide is not just placed loosely out into the environment. You also want to ensure that rodenticides are not placed in an area that is accessible to children or pets. And having a tamper-resistant bait box helps with this. It's always important to immediately dispose of used rodenticide, bait stations and containers, as well as poisoned rodents, and to never leave them out and never dispose of them by throwing them into a natural area. So once you've addressed and tried to manage a rodent issue, how do you clean up an area to make your home feel safe and comfortable again? Well, because of the spread of zoonotic diseases, it's very important that you follow cleaning procedures that are going to keep you as safe as possible. And we'll include a resource from the CDC on how to clean up after rodents. But you never want to handle them with your bare hands. It's always a good idea to wear gloves. Sweeping and vacuuming can actually aerosolize disease-causing pathogens. So before any sweeping or vacuuming happens, the area needs to be fully disinfected. You want to discard any food contaminated or even suspected to be contaminated by rodents. Always wash your hands properly and thoroughly, and protect vulnerable populations such as immunocompromised individuals, young children, and people who are pregnant. All right, so just to review what we've gone over, there are 3 species of those non-native commensal rodents: the Norway rat, the roof rat, and the house mouse. These commensal rodents are attracted to human structures that provide them with food, shelter, and water. You want to prioritize prevention and exclusion techniques. Lethal spring-loaded snap traps are going to be your recommended and easiest to apply method for homeowners. And then poisons and rodenticides should be used in the cases that require them. So large-scale or very complex infestations, because they do have serious impacts for wildlife and surrounding ecosystems. And then when managing a rodent infestation, you always want to use prevention and exclusion methods and techniques in tandem with trapping and other lethal methods of management for the best results during that active infestation. So again, we have several resources here that we'll be sharing with you. And if you want to learn more about wildlife or invasive species, you can always check our website using these QR codes. All right, thank you.